Hello, and a very warm welcome to the fourth series of Material Matters with Grant Gibson. That's me. Rather remarkably, we've been going for almost a year now. If you hadn't heard the show before, then the idea is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about material with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it's changed their lives and careers. Today I find myself in the East London studio of the extraordinary designer Bethan Laura Wood. Since graduating from the Royal College of Art a decade ago, Bethan has built a practice that's characterised by material investigation, collaboration and a fascination with colour and pattern. She's worked with the likes of Italian furniture manufacturer Moroso, ceramics company Rosenthal, fashion house Hermes and the champagne brand Perrier-Jouet, as well as the Nilfar Gallery in Milan. She currently has a rug created for CC Tappis in the Beazley Designs of the Year at the London Design Museum, and has also worked on a rather unusual jukebox of epidemics at the Wellcome Collection's new permanent gallery, Being Human. However, she's arguably best known for her work in laminate marquetry, which kicked off a long-running series of pieces entitled Superfake. Bethan, thank you very much for doing this.
No worries.
Should we kick off with the laminate?
Sure.
This is a podcast about materials. So what is laminate actually made of?
So laminate is normally 0.8 of a millimetre thick. If you're lucky, sometimes 1.2. And it's a mix of paper and resins, really. You kind of have these big machines that they're kind of the resin floats along the bottom, and then there's a piece of paper that kind of will float in gravity like this, hovering, and then they kind of get pressed and stuck together. It's a material that's very much made from mass manufacture and comes from a large scale industry, and it's very connected to being produced in set time runs of certain patterns. So for me, that's what I found so interesting about laminate, is it's very connected to mass culture and mass aesthetic to do with different periods of time. So obviously laminate as a material itself goes in and out of fashion, so there'll be points in time when it will be around a lot more than others, but it's generally managed to kind of hang on in there through thick and thin, through maximism and minimalism. And so that's why it just fascinated me so much.
But the connotations around it are generally that it's a cheap
within
material.
the UK, yes, for sure. And I think it's you really have to look at, like a lot of materials at certain periods of time in their lifespan, they were seen as the most pinnacle, the most elite, the most special, and then they became, cheap. It's like, pineapple was the king, and then it became a ring in a can, and was the cheapest date you could put on a platter for your guests. So I think that I also get really fascinated by the narrative that a material has, and laminate's this one that came from this kind of revolution of the kitchen and the liberation of this very female-led domestic space, and was all part of when it was all the gadgets and there was all this kind of modernism going on there. So it's very connected to this, and then in some ways that then makes it very domestic, which has allowed it to become seen as low end, because you put it in a space which you treat quite poorly. I like that with the marquetry. People often kind of question, they're like, oh, is it very, how strong is it? Is it going to last? And I'm like, how do you treat your kitchen your nan's kitchen top? Probably not very well. So it's pretty stable. But then it also has this amazing connection with movements like Memphis, and it's something that goes through all these different kind of levels of luxury and non-luxury, and I think that's what made me so kind of obsessed with it.
So what was the process? Were you looking for a material whose connotations you could transform and change, or did you find laminate and go, there's a story here, I can work with this?
It was definitely, I think, more the second of the two ways. As a platform at the RCA, we were very much focused on the idea of the city and locality, and making work in response very particularly physically to an area or a place. And I think also I was spending quite a lot of my time panicking at the RCA, so walking around East London was a lot easier than being in the school at that point. So walking, I started to pick up and photograph a lot more of these kind of public patterns, which was something I'd been interested in even back on my foundation. Actually, I photographed what I called public patterns, and laminate was this material that I would come across again and again, especially in East London. Now, sadly, there's not so many of them. They're all kind of dying out, but there was some amazing laundry places that with the really intense, massive, marbly laminate that's I haven't been able to find. Now it may have changed, but at the time, all of this was no longer being made. Nobody made this kind of scale of marble madness. So all these laundromats had this amazing, intense, like marble laminate, and so I just started to become really fascinated with that as a particular material that I felt I could work with in connection to this interest in the idea of public patterns, or patterns that people have a connection to. So I think that was how I kind of focused down on laminate being the material that I could kind of access.
And then was it immediate that you were going to slice it and inlay it into things? Where did marquetry, where was the interest in that particular technique emerge?
I think it was more because laminate it has very set particulars about it. So it is always going to be 0.8 or 1.2 thick because of the way it's produced, and it has to be standardized in this way. So there's certain things about its sheetiness that really suits marquetry, and then on the other hand, you can't work with it like you would, for example, with when you do even wood marquetry or the mixed material inlay, where you have like a brass, a wood, and another material, because most of the time these are glued and then they're sliced. You either slice them like a stick of rock to create your leaves, or you glue them and then you can clean back. Whereas laminate, like if you scratch it, that's you're kind of, that's your lot. So I think for me it felt that there was a way that I could work with it within the marquetry discipline, because also of modern cutting techniques like laser, which allowed you to do cutting from the top, and there was no need to have multiples of exactly the same shape repeatedly to be able to get the numbers down. The computer doesn't really care where your vectors are going,
right?
As long as there's lots of them, and the more of them, it's cheaper. It just seemed to be the right way to work with this material, because it worked for this material. I mean, it was quite a nightmare to find the right way to cut it successfully, because laminate burns and is quite toxic. Yeah. So I had a wonderful technician at the RCA called Jovica, who enjoyed the travel into the world of trying to find the best way to cut the laminate and to pick it out bit at a time, and all these different kind of techniques to be able to get my goal, which especially for the early first works was really about being able to use every element of the laminate. So instead of cutting in the way that you see a lot in industry, which is you cut a shape and there's a lot of wastage around because of sometimes to do with the techniques that are available at that point, and sometimes just because it's easier to not have to be that controlling over your line. And I was really wanting to push it, because if you can cut with the exact right system, then you can almost use every single bit that you've got. And because I decided that I wanted to use a mix of laminates, so not necessarily laminates that had already been glued on a table, because then these have a whole other length of their own issues that you have to deal with to take them off, and they're off that medium and stuff, but more to use like back archive laminates, and laminates that I was like chasing out the last bit of dead stock of this glitter laminate for ages, kind of trying to hunt down the last sheets. So some of them became much more precious than others, and that also was a bit the narrative that I was interested in, because these sheets, when they're in production, they're kind of there's thousands of them made because that's the system they're from. But the minute they're no longer part of the party, you're on a ticking clock over what's going to ever be available or be able to be made again, because these are all made from being part of a system that at that point had these pigments, as in mass sculpture of this particular color, these glitters with the glitters available at this time, and they all come together to make this shot of this. And so by doing this technique where I could literally use every single tiny bit from a piece, it meant that even laminates I only had like an A4 sample sheet of from Abbott, and they were lovely to work with.
The Italian.
Yeah, I wrote to them.
Abbott Laminati.
I wrote off to them kind of going, hello, you make the best laminates that I really like, and you've got all the success history, and can I play with you? And they were like, yeah, come and play with us. And then, I was like literally deep in the archive in the London depot, and just bringing home boxes and boxes of all these A4 samples. So it became quite important that I also found a way to be able to work with these smaller sheets in the way to get the most out of the bit that was going to be flat. And so it was just a really kind of obsessive way of making a language that worked for the laminate, or worked for what I felt created something with the laminate that would connect with people, and would have enough space within the designs that somebody would see, a fried egg, and someone else sees like a sweet, and somebody else sees like bacteria, because there's different people react to different things, different colors, different combinations slightly differently, because it's that narrative history of what certain combinations of things mean to different people of different ages. And this kind of rock-based pattern really allowed me to kind of play around with those kind of things.
You talked about finding the real college of art, a panicking situation. Was it difficult? I'm intrigued. So I think if you ask a lot of people that go to the RCA, it's not uncommon that a lot of people that are that are now doing amazingly well, we all kind of go a little bit crazy at some point at the RCA, and you kind of get quite lost. But that was also a lot of the point of it, and the importance of it being 2 years and being this thing that you kind of got lost to be able to refine what it was that you were going to be able to do, or what was important about what you brought to the table versus another designer. And I think also for me, from about 16, I'd kind of obsessively wanted to go to the RCA. I'd watched a BBC documentary on the RCA in the 1990s, I think it was. Well, yes, I think it was when Ron Arad had just arrived.
It had.
He arrived doing the furniture course rather
than the
design products that subsequently it became.
I mean, I watched every week, which was, one was like millinery, one was sculpture. I was like, oh no, that's the one I want to do. I just was quite, it was just very kind of important to me as this thing that I knew that that's where I wanted to go. And so when you get there, it's kind of a little bit like, oh no, I'm here. Am I good enough? What am I doing? And, so I think I did for a little while in my first year, find it difficult to know how to make work, or I felt very unproductive. I think I actually was being quite productive, but I think, you get very lost in your own head about what you're doing. So I think that's why quite a lot of my first year work was made by walking anywhere but in the college. And I made a lot of kind of interventions on the street and lots of things like this. But I had such lovely tutors as well. I had Martino and Jürgen Bay, so it was like, because I also really respected them so much, and I desperately wanted to have like a deep design conversation, the pressure of when it was my tutorial with one of them, I'd just be like, I'd just kind of crumble. So it was a bit of an interesting time for a while, but I wouldn't regret or change it for the world, because it definitely, through going through that, it really helped me to try and understand and be encouraged, and to have the support of such lovely tutors that really tried very hard also to find different ways to kind of allow me to find my rhythm, that I became more confident in using colour and using pattern and using things that maybe I personally liked within my own life and wearing, but that I wasn't sure why it needed or what was the need for it within my work. And I think if I hadn't have kind of gone back to like stripped all the way down to the floor, that I wouldn't have known a little bit more about what it is that me personally brings to design, and what works for me to work on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, can we take you back to your childhood? You grew up in Shrewsbury.
Yeah.
Your dad was an architect. Your mum was an occupational therapist, I think I'm right in saying.
Yeah.
I mean, was it that documentary that made you think I want to be a designer, or had you already decided that design was for you? When did you become interested in it?
I definitely was. I was always going to do something creative. That was never going to be not on the cards. I think from a very young age. I think as I grew up, I kind of started to understand a little bit more about different genres of creativity. I think it was more when I was at secondary school. I had a really nice DT tutor called Mr. Roberts, and he let me come and attend like the late or after school classes he'd do for like the guys in a couple of years above that were like behind on their projects, and let me come in and like just play with pouring aluminium or making something in wood or making animatronics. Or so I think that was when I properly started to kind of become more interested in design as a direction within creativity that I would do. But I think for me the reason why I was so kind of impressed by the program on the RCA and going, okay, that's where I need to go to do this seriously, was because I think in my hometown it's I think at school people kind of were maybe a bit dismissive over like that you could do that for a living in some ways. And I wasn't the most kind of normal looking kid as it was at that point either. So I think for me, I was definitely already falling in love with elements of making and objects that people touch, not just look at, that you interact with, that have a conversation. But I think the program at the RCA really made me kind of understand how to like make that into a life, a career. Because I think in Shrewsbury and in this area, that there's amazing like crafts there, and I used to do so many I used to make slip for an artist, ceramicist Jan Stanley, for hours on a Saturday. I used to be try and find any way in to kind of learn about making something with materials. But I think I knew that I wanted to work with craft, maybe not in the same traditional craft way as what I'd seen around, where it was, maybe making a certain bowl, but with a fish emblem and making that, and that's what you make, and that's the only thing you produce. And I think now I love working with people that have a passion for one particular thing and they like obsessively craft that thing. But I think when you're young and when you're also trying to understand who you are and what makes you different from where you've come from and the environment you're in, I think I was nervous or not nervous, but I also knew that I never wanted to be kind of limited only to one material, that I was really interested in, everything. And so I think for me that kind of getting access to like things, like I recorded so many things from the TV, art programs, and I'd collect all these magazines about this kind of things going on, because I really wanted to kind of discover different ways of being creative. outside of the creative that I'd been surrounded with, I think, from a young age. Because I think you just get excited to learn new things. And when you're in a small town, it's inevitable, I think, that there are people that kind of will always stay in the same area and love it and feel a great connection to a place. And there's always people that like will grow up one place, and at some point there's the clock that ticks and goes next place, and you're
so you're
kind
keen
of
to
ready.
get out, in other words.
Yeah, I was definitely ready to kind of extend my horizons to other places and to be creative in other ways, and so I went to Kingston University to do my foundation.
Right.
This is my kind of skirting around to get to London.
Yeah.
And that was again a really great course, very materials based, very makey, and I think even still there, I was still like in two minds what direction I wanted to do. And I remember Michelle, who was one of the lovely tutors on that course for the design department, and I think I was talking to her about not quite sure knowing what I wanted to do, and she was like, get over yourself, you're a designer, go and design things. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna go and design things now.
So Brighton.
Yeah, and then Brighton. Again, I think Michelle suggested Brighton over, because I think I was still like monologue-y, get to London. And I'm so happy that I was suggested that Brighton would be a good course for me, because it's so material led there, and I loved it. It was a course half craft, half design, or the craft and the design course, which I think there are various names for the courses during different years, from WMCP to but they were kind of combined for the first year, and then you kind of chose either to specialize in two materials or to do design where you didn't specialize in a material but you do more design led. And I think I just was like, I don't want to specialize in any materials, so I went down the design route, but again kind of would spend many hours in each workshop playing around with different materials and getting to learn techniques that maybe I wasn't meant to be learning yet, but I was a bit impatient, so I just wanted to do everything.
So what kind of things were you designing at Brighton?
I did a lot. I was really into ceramics in Brighton, to the point where I think at one point I was thinking about whether I'd do the ceramic course at the RCA. I really like molds, and I got really obsessed by this world between production and mass and then hand, and like ceramics very contradictory as a material, because on the one hand it's so temperamental, and then on the other hand, if you can get all your dials and all your things in the right place, you can produce a volume. So I think I was very interested by that as a material, and we had a lovely visiting tutor, Barnaby Barford,
who's going to be in this series.
I love it. Say hello for me.
I will.
He's lovely, and he was brought in, I think, to tutor the second years and the third years, and I think I just was so obsessively in the plaster room that he was very kind, and he gave me a couple of tutorials on the things that I was trying to do and the mold making, and I went and interned for him over a summer.
So I'm quite intrigued that you were already thinking that your work was sitting somewhere between the industrial and the studio, I guess you'd say, because you do occupy quite an interesting position in the design world, and I think the design world has changed a bit whilst you came out of the Royal College. I mean, were you aware when you came out with the laminate marquetry pieces that you did where your work would sit?
I think I had more of an intention of where it needed to sit,
right,
for its narrative. So I think I didn't make the marquetry because I wanted to make gallery work. I made the marquetry laminate because it was the right work for the question that was interesting for that material. But then obviously you become aware that for that to hold true about looking or re-examining the association somebody has with something, it you can't get away from, we're also a world that does place value monetarily on things. So it didn't suit the context correctly for me to make something out of a material that's normally associated of being very mass and throwaway, even though it's not really throwaway, but it's because, you know, we see it so much used, and then re-put it back in exactly the same world. So I knew for this work, and also because of the time it takes to do, that it needed to be in more of a gallery or a limited context. For me, it is important to kind of be slightly aware of what you're making and what's it for. And part of that, you have to acknowledge that at some point it needs, by its nature and the nature of you being able to kind of make a living of what you do, it has to go somewhere. And so I knew for these types of works that I was doing that this almost slightly new market of the crossover between art and design was maybe going to be the place that it should sit.
I mean, I was intrigued. I do a bit of research about people when I'm doing this. And there was a passage that I read from you that talked about, and this is something that comes up a lot in these podcasts, about your dyslexia.
Yeah.
And how it might have prompted you to look at pattern in a different way. And I rather like this. It's slightly long, but I'll read it anyway. And where you said, as a teenager, undiagnosed, I found my own way. You make sense of the written word, only being able to make sense of a sentence when broken down, highlighted in colours to regroup words into a form that I could more easily understand. Now I make my living sharing and seeing the world through colour and patterns extracted from the things that surround me. So is this where you feel that your interest in pattern started?
I think it's definitely part of it. I mean, the only way I could make the words make sense is by having them in colours, which would make a pattern that I could read. I'd say the letters they're a type of pattern. It's not the rules of patterns of language is very different to the kind of repeating pattern languages that you have, but it's still forms and shapes. But for some reason, the way in which those forms and shapes are put together, I find much harder to understand unless I start putting it in a language I do understand better, which is colour. And for some reason, different colours, when you highlight them on the page or with the letters, they sit at different heights. And I think that then allows me to be able to move them into a pattern that maybe I can read. I even today I was sending some text back to Perry-Jouet, who I've been working with a lot the last 2 years, and they'd sent me a text that they wanted me to confirm, and I sent it back, and she was joking that I'd made even the text multicolored because I'd like highlighted all these different bits because I was changing some elements to kind of make it read better. And also I needed them to be aware of what I've changed, because normally I have a very close friend of mine who's a writer will re-proofread most of things that I write before I send it to anybody else, because it's tends not to make still a huge amount of sense, even if I spend a long time trying to make it correct. So yeah, even today she was that we were having a joke about the fact that I'd turned a black and white page into multicolours.
So one of the things I was intrigued that the research turned up was that your mother collected fake fruit. Is this where your interest in super faking products and the materials and changing their meaning? Is this where this started?
It's definitely part of it. I think, funnily, nearly everything that my mum used to collect or silently collects inside a cupboard, I've kind of taken on and then like expanded. So my mum collects Bakelite, and she likes plastic, and there's a couple of books that she has that I used to love when I lived at home, and so now that's kind of partly why I have this kind of strong obsession with all things plastic fantastic, and the same with the fake fruits. This was another thing that she was quite into, and I've kind of taken over and gone bigger, and occasionally I buy my mum some new fake fruit. But a lot of the time I have to buy two. So one goes to my house and one goes to her house. So yeah, a lot of the things that my mum collected spurred me on. But my dad's not really into collecting. He doesn't like knickknacks. So I think it's also that thing that when my mum saw that I was like interested in, for example, she had loads of glass jelly molds. and I used them for a project. And so she gave me all of her glass jelly molds because they were kind of liberated from a cupboard. So I think I kind of fill my house with the collections maybe my mum has to keep in a smaller space.
Because you're an avid collector.
I like a good bit of stuff, yes.
But certainly your relationship with colour, certainly in your work, seems to have changed, I would suggest, after you went to Mexico, which I think was a award you won with the W Hotel Group, is that right?
It was an award for Design Miami Basel.
Design Miami Basel.
And for that year, it was sponsored by the W Hotels.
Okay.
And that's why they decided to do it in this residency format. We were asked to make work specifically about the city, and we had a brief of what's global, local, and local, global. And so for me, I found this very interesting because it's similar in the way that I'm kind of half fascinated by production and half reviled by it, and this kind of in between these two kind of contradictions. And so getting to go to Mexico for this award, and then the fate of having the wonderful Fernando Lopez, who I share a studio with now, was an intern of mine because he was still a student at that time, was luckily going to be in Mexico City during this window to see his family. So I just had the most amazing kind of bumper pack introduction to the city, to its colours, to its history, to its markets. And it blew my mind because it was really the first non kind of European visit I'd properly done. We went to Wales when I was a child, and maybe like Italy, but not very much. We mainly went to Wales, which is lovely, and I love Wales, and I, but I think it was really the first time that I'd really experienced being in a whole environment that is set on a completely different set of rules, especially in relation to colour, than in Europe. And I think at that point I'd, for example, done a residency in Venice, which I'd got very interested by because that also is a city that has a very particular colour palette. It's wet and very kind of gradiated in tone, but it's very earthy, and it has this very particular tone to it. But Mexico was just like something on steroids, because the default is like way more extreme than like the most extreme traditionally you'd maybe find within the kind of European and the kind of colour sensibilities that I'd been kind of surrounded with.
So how's that affected your work since?
I think you can see nearly every piece of work that I made from that time of going to be in Mexico was heavily influenced. So I've done quite a series of works from the applique piece I did first for Quadvat with a lovely embroiderer Laura Lees, and we made this one-off piece, which then I worked with Moroso the year before, when we did like a whole showroom called Monomania Mexico, and was about this kind of love affair that I had with the colours of Mexico, and in particular this one building called the New Basilica of the Lady of Guadalupe, which has the most beautiful stained glass windows.
It's quite a brutalist building, isn't
yeah,
it?
it's super brutalist. Yeah. It's like a brutalist spaceship. It's amazing. I went back to it last year with Denai, who works with me in my studio, and I just still was wanting to lick it. It's so amazing as a thing, as a space, it's just beautiful. The stained glass windows are a mix of like cast glass, pyramids and wiggles, and I'd never seen stained glass that was this mix of being put together from components like you normally think of stained glass, but then also three-dimensional at the same time. And so every angle you would kind of, because this church is like this big round spaceship, kind of, if you imagine it, big copper kind of trumpet roof. And so every time you kind of walk around it, you see the glass in different angles, and so you get a completely different kind of pattern building. So I kind of walked around this one church, sketching and drawing the stained glass from all different angles to create a pattern. And so I've gone back and forth to this kind of Guadeloupe pattern world that I created specifically about this church for several projects. And so for the Moroso show, we kind of literally filled the whole showroom just based on that one obsession.
Because your interest is quite intriguing, because on one hand, I've seen you talk about how you love brutalist architecture, so a lot of concrete, grey. On the other hand, the other influences you talk about are Ettore Sottsass, Edoardo Palazzo, both kind of colourful palazzo. People will know, I guess, most from Tottenham Court Road, the mosaics there. So you're bringing these two influences together.
Yes and no, but I think if you look at quite a lot of brutalist architecture has this kind of bonkers crazy town when it comes to its windows, or there's elements within the brutalism that, because that's so aggressive in one direction, it can handle a quite hardcore colour partner. So in quite a lot of the kind of brutalist style, especially churches that I've been to, they've had the most bonkers windows, and there's that combination between that quite hard, heavy, concretey aesthetic has a really interesting relationship with being an offset for this kind of intense colour. I think what connects, or what the things that I connect to with Palazzi and Sottsass is also because I really loved their ability to be within two worlds at the same time. So Sottsass, with like things like the Valentine typewriter, made incredibly, for its period of time and these kind of things, amazingly beautiful, bonkers, but for what it needed to do, practical typewriter. But then he'd also make unashamedly non-super functional, if you're looking at a function of making a vase that a flower goes into, things with Vanini, for example, because it was about making it suit the function of that material and what that specialism did. And what I love about Palazzi is he's a fine artist, but the mediums he worked with were quite often things like screen printing and things that were seen as from mass industry and not fine art, but work with them in this beauty of really understanding how that process works and doing multi-layers, and the quality of his work in that medium. I think for both of them, I respect a lot, because of course I like that they go quite crazy town with their pattern and colour, but it's their ability to respect the material or the industry that they're working particularly for, but still it's unashamedly from them. But it never feels like their work is compromising what they're bringing to the table or disrespecting what they're playing with. And so I think for me that's something that I try very hard to try and find the right way of balancing what I'm bringing, but also what's there from a material or a way of producing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. In some ways, I mean, you've kind of aped the Sottsass model. I mean, you're not working for Olivetti, admittedly, but you're working with significant Italian manufacturers, Moroso being one, for instance, but also working with these artisans. And you're very careful, it seems to me, to give credit for the work you do with some of these artisans. That's important to you.
Yes, that's been like a key cornerstone to what I do, and I think that's been in there from, I think, Martino Gamper and Jürgen. When we were at the RCA, we were always very, it was you always kind of respected who you were working with, and you acknowledged that. And when I did my first residency outside of the RCA, that Martina was on the board of, and then this led to another one working with artisans. These ones in particular were about making sure you credit the artisan, and that work would be double credited.
Right. Because often the art world in particular doesn't go down that route, right?
I think it's always difficult because on the one hand, you always need to find the right way that you can make sure that you don't give away all your secrets. But I think for certain types of work, and when you do something that's so intrinsic to your hand and their hand, I want, like, for example, Pietro. I met him through the second residency I did in Italy, in Vicenza, and I love working with him, and he's so sweet and lovely, and his family are awesome. And why wouldn't I want to credit and make sure that if people want to do experimental Pyrex, that they know that he's there, and that, because I also want him to be able to profit and get something from the work that we do together.
Yeah. So that was quite interesting, the Pyrex work that you've done. Was that just fluke? There seems to be a kitchen theme going on in your early years.
I've left the ladies' kitchen and taken it all out in the man's design world a little bit. I think for here, because most of our associations in the UK is scienceware and kitchenware for Pyrex. Now it's a bit different because suddenly Pyrex has been a lot in a popular kind of design a bit more. So its associations are maybe more in flux. But when I started working with it, I really only knew it from this kind of world. And I think I quite like that about working with materials that have quite set connotations or associations. And yeah, maybe I will come across another kitchen staple from the 50s and start liberating it out of its confinements.
Can we talk about your look, Bethan?
Yes,
it comes up in all the pieces that are always written about you. And there's a lovely quote of yours which I like, where you described yourself as Buckaroo meets Russian doll.
That would be my look, yes.
The way you dress and the work you produce are kind of very much interlinked, it seemed to me. When did this style develop? Were you walking about like this in Shrewsbury as a teenager, or when did it begin to take seed?
I was definitely walking around in Shrewsbury in an equally probably very silly and odd outfit, but at that point in time it was very rational and correct for me, in the same way that I may change my look in 2 years and think that I look ridiculous now. But I definitely was experimenting with dressing up, even from about year 8 in secondary school. I kind of the kind of penny dropped that people were going to tease me whatever, so I might as well kind of enjoy it. And then I think I started making there was that very 90s hairstyle of like small butterfly clips that you would, as a girl or a boy with long hair, you would kind of twist it back and make like a little array. So I kind of made a lot of my own versions of these from like with pencil sharpeners, and then I'd kind of sharpen my own pencil in my hair, and really sensible things for not
you had
getting
pencil
bullied.
sharpeners in your hair?
Yeah. Well,
Excellent.
I made clips.
Oh, I see.
With pencil sharpeners stuck on them.
Okay.
And so then you could like sharpen a pencil. So I was very much into this kind of halo array of headgear.
So your response to being teased was just to go even further, more extreme. Which is quite a brave thing to do. Right?
A bit, yeah, because it was going to happen regardless. So I might as well just find it liberating and be able to do what I want rather than worry.
Because you were different, or?
I don't think I think I was, very crafty person. So I don't think it helped that, people would, in my break times, I'd be like in the art room making charcoal drawings of naked ladies because I was really into Degas, and I had no problem with drawing naked ladies, but at school young kids are not particularly nice, and they'd be calling me lesbian 60s throwback, and I'd kind of be, what in that sentence is not a good thing? They're all like 60s are good, lesbians can be cool, throwback I like vintage, so I think I kind of was already kind of always making stuff and always kind of interested in doing that, and so I being teased a bit was kind of already in the package. And I had a lovely mum who would like help me or sew me dresses, so I think you had to make your own summer dress, or you were allowed to make your own summer dresses. So I instructed my mum to make me one that looked like a giant doll dress and with big buttons, and bless my mum, she made it for me, but it obviously doesn't necessarily go down well with a whole audience of young children. But so it was it was something that I found solace in, that way of expressing myself, and so I it was very kind of hair focused, I think, at school, mainly because if I tried to go anywhere here, I was on my face, I was made to wash it off, which I think was once or twice, so then I think I started wearing a lot of kind of vintage 1960s dresses. I had a velour psychedelic purple catsuit that I was quite into for quite a long time, until I think it completely kind of disintegrated. So I definitely was dressing up in my hometown, and I think when I moved to Brighton, there was quite a strong kind of not dress up scene, but it was much more kind of open to people having different styles and different aesthetics. And then definitely when I moved to London, I was in London for like a year before I started at the RCA, and there was a great kind of club culture, subculture going on at that time. It was very dress up focused. So then I really felt, I was at home with the clowns, and I became more extravagant in that window with some of the makeup stuff. But it's definitely something that I've been doing more or less for a long time.
And can you, you have such a strong identity. Can you, if you decide, do you think you can just change it? And would the work change with your look if you changed?
I think if you've known me kind of long enough, like my friend Liz, who I mentioned earlier, who's the writer that has been helping me for many years with my written words, she remarks that there is quite a big change between the look that she knew from when I was in Brighton to the look I have now. And I think definitely when I'm gearing up or starting to digest or understand a new colour palette, or I'm wanting to move on to a new colour palette, now I often will find that I'm wearing that palette, or I'm kind of playing with it because it's, in a way, it's much safer on me. If I do it wrong for a day, like maybe someone gets a not great picture of a look that's a bit terrible, but at least I'm learning something from it. Whereas if I use like a new color palette straight on a piece of work, sometimes if I haven't been able to sit with colors or proportions of colors for a while, it's difficult to know whether it's like a good palette or it's just a kind of an in-between palette that you play around with before you get to like a good one. And so yeah, definitely my dressing up as I've grown older and I've been more comfortable with the connection between my work and my dress up has become more mixed. I think when I was a student in Brighton, I kind of didn't like that people automatically thought that I was a fashion designer because of being a dress up. And yes, wearing a synthetic tutu in a workshop welding was something that I was informed was not going to work out so well. And the technicians in Brighton even like gave me some bright orange dungarees in a kind of trade-off to try and not have me go up in flames, is not necessarily the works together all the time. But I think when now I'm much more comfortable in this is what I do, and I like to cross over in different mediums. And I think when you're younger and you're trying to really understand what it is that you want to do, you can be a bit more sensitive about when people automatically want to put you in a category because of something that's as personal as the way you dress, if you get what I mean. So I'm less bothered by people having an opinion about it than maybe I was in the past.
What does the future hold? You're about to get on a plane. We just caught you before you get on a plane to Shanghai. Right?
Yes. I'm off to Shanghai to hang out with my tree again.
Your tree is the Perrier-Jouet.
Yes,
installation.
I've made this large sculptural piece for Perrier-Jouet, and there's 4 of them now, and they're traveling around different parts of the world, celebrating the world of champagne. And exactly. And occasionally they ask if I will go and be with the tree to do conversations or meet and greets. And I love traveling and going to different countries, so most of the time I'm going to say yes, because I love to get to experience different places, and I'm really proud of that project. And it was a lot of work. It was a big ask to make something so big. I'd not made a single kind of sculptural piece that size before. So yeah, I'm still very close to that piece. So I like going and seeing it, because I actually haven't seen it a huge amount of time, because we kind of built it and then it went off traveling, and then when we build another one it goes off straight away. So sometimes it's quite nice to be able to have a bit of time with something, because you can start to kind of understand what's working, what's not, in terms of then what language you can take forward to another project. And
Anything else you can tell us?
Other things. There will be more things.
Okay.
Trust me. And for sure around Salone, which is the date that happens every year in April in Milan. So I for sure will be making some new pieces with Nilafar Gallery. What, I don't know right now, and maybe a few other things in other places. But there'll be more coming. But let me first finish what I've got.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear it. Thank you so much for your time, Bethan.
No worries.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And to learn more about Bethan's work, go to bethanlaurawood.com. There are images from the interviews, as well as little films and other things on my Instagram page, Grant on Design. If you've enjoyed listening and want to see this podcast flourish, then please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this from, and go to my Patreon page and make a pledge. You can find that at patreon.com/Material Matters. You'll be helping take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft and design to a whole new audience. Thanks very much for listening.